Welcome to the Employment Law and HR Podcast with your host, Alison Colley.
Hello and welcome to this episode 205 of the Employment Law and HR Podcast. I'm your host, Alison Colley. I'm an employment solicitor and HR specialist, and I run the firm Real Employment Law Advice, where together with my colleagues we provide advice and assistance to both employers and employees on all aspects of employment law. Now, in recent weeks, we've seen a flurry of people signing up for our HR Hub membership service. So that is a service we provide for businesses where we provide ongoing support and advice at various ranges of packages from silver, gold and platinum. And the prices range from £175 plus VAT for the silver service. Now, what we're finding is lots of businesses are signing up to our service because it gives them the peace of mind that they need to know that they're doing everything that they can correctly in terms of HR and the law, but also that they are being a proactive and good employer. It's much like some of the services that you might have heard of from the likes of Peninsula or Krona, but actually the service we provide is much more tailored to your business, is much more personalised, and is also more proactive. So if you're looking for a more proactive employment law and HR support, then do get in touch. Would be happy to have a no obligation discussion with you, and I can send you through a quote in about 5 minutes. So if you want to get in touch, you can email me. It's alison@realemploymentlawsadvice.co.uk, or you can phone our head office on 01983 897 003, and my colleague Kathy, who answers the phones, will be happy to arrange a time for an appointment or a call back with you. So now that that's my little sales pitch over with, I'm going to get into this week's featured content, which is all about the appraisal process. Now, as I said, this episode is about the appraisal process, and the reason I thought I would cover this is because it's actually a topic that I'm covering in a webinar with our HR Harbour members this week. But I also wanted to highlight the issue because appraisals is something that can be done very badly, should I say. And the reason why it's been at the forefront of my mind recently is because I have recently been advising somebody and they were telling me about their appraisal process. And within their appraisal process, they have a scoring system. And then the scores are then dealt with by senior management or the senior management team, who then look at the scores and will sort of recalibrate them, I think they called it. So they will change those scores potentially in relation to how management or senior management view the individual. Now, there are a couple of things that raised a red flag for me in relation to this. The first is, why are you doing an appraisal process with a scoring? When you do scoring for appraisals, it's like having a school report where you get an A, B or C or whatever the new GCSEs is now. It's like 1, 2 and 3, isn't it? So you're giving someone essentially a school report by giving them a scoring. And then the second thing is, how does that make the individuals feel if they go through the appraisal process with their manager? They get a score based on their performance, which has been looked at, hopefully on objective criteria by their manager. And then it goes to someone else who doesn't work with them on a day-to-day basis, who then potentially changes it or downgrades it. And it reminded me of my other half used to work for Nationwide Building Society. And their appraisal process was very similar. And it was at the point where you weren't allowed to get exceeds expectations if there were too many people getting exceeds expectations. So rather than have a scoring that had different levels, like I think exceeds expectations, meets expectations, or doesn't, something like that. I can't quite remember. But what they would do is you would get your appraisal outcome, but it would be subject to calibration. And so if they had too many people receiving exceeds expectations, then somebody would get downgraded. And I remember how that made him feel. So he would feel like, what's the point? What is their point if I'm only going to be downgraded on the basis that there are too many people on exceeds expectations? So it was very demotivating for staff. And I think having that kind of process in place is very demotivating. Certainly, I think getting some input from senior management or up the line is helpful, and often on appraisal forms that we create, for example, we'll have a box at the end for sort of a comment from the manager or manager's manager about the process or the feedback on performance, that kind of thing. But actually just going through and changing the scoring or changing the outcome for reasons that are seemingly crazy, if you ask me, it just doesn't seem very, very good for the staff or for motivation. So it prompted me to think about appraisals again. And I quite often deliver appraisal training for businesses. So those businesses who do appraisals and want to have some upskilling, or perhaps they haven't been doing appraisals before, but they want to, and they want to train their managers on how to do it. And so I thought this would be a good topic to cover. Of course, when we're talking about appraisals, we're not talking about something that is a legal process here. So there's no legal process or nothing set out in law that says you have to have an appraisal or an annual review. And there isn't any process set out. So you can pretty much come up with it yourself, however it works for your business. Now, of course, the first point that you want to start with, if you're looking at either introducing an appraisal process or reviewing your appraisal process, is why do we do appraisals? What's the point? What's the point of having an annual review? And what do we want to achieve from it? And if you have that in mind when you're setting out the process and the criteria and any forms or anything that you're doing, then hopefully that will be the key thing to getting what you want out of it. There's no point just introducing an appraisal process or having annual reviews for the sake of it. You really need to understand why. Now, there are lots of reasons why businesses do have appraisal processes, and often the question hasn't been asked as to really why do we want to do this and what do we want to achieve. But mostly they're held because people think that that's what they should do, that's what we've always done. For some reason, people think that they can motivate staff by having an annual review with them, and they're looking at ways in which they can improve their processes. But the real reasons why you need to do appraisals, in my view, is for things like reinforcing the objectives of the business or organisation, allowing people to see how they fit into the bigger picture, to help them improve their performance and grow within the business, encouraging growth and development, to provide motivation for the staff, to help improve where there is poor performance. But of course, if you listen to my podcast on performance management before, you'll know that I definitely wouldn't wait until the annual appraisal or the annual review to talk about poor performance. But it is an opportunity as part of that process to talk about it, and also determine training needs. It's surprising the amount of employees who are disgruntled if they don't have an appraisal or an annual review. It's one of those things that often comes up when you're talking to employees who have got grievances about various things. They will often say to me, "Do you know what, Alison, I didn't even have an appraisal. They don't even do appraisals," or, "we should have had appraisals and they never did them," kind of thing. So it is important as well for the individual staff, particularly if regular conversations aren't taking place about performance and feedback. It can be the only time some people get that feedback. So it's really important that you get it right. Now, when you're thinking about getting an appraisal process right, if you're the person doing the appraisal, you've never done one before, you're not really sure how to approach it, what's the number one skill that you need to do an effective appraisal? Well, it's actually listening. Being able to listen and listen appropriately in the correct way is the number one skill that you need for an appraisal. Contrary to what many people think, in my view, and it might be quite controversial, I don't know, let me know if you agree, but I think that an appraisal process should be 95% the employee talking or the appraisee talking and 5% the appraiser talking. It should be about listening. It should be your opportunity to ask open questions, to see how things are going, and to really listen to what they are saying and take it on board. So listening is the number one skill. And then the next thing is, if you're really nervous about it and it's the first time you've done it, is having a good process in place. So that is getting your preparation right is the first step in the process for an appraisal. Thinking about the timing of the appraisal meeting, where you're going to have it. Do you have the correct forms? Have you talked to the individual in advance about any issues? The whole point of an appraisal process is there should be no surprises at all to the individual about what you're going to talk about. So whether that be positive or negative things, but particularly if you're talking about negative things, it shouldn't come as a surprise to them. You should also check through their HR records, their contract and their job description. Make sure that their job description is correct and you have an understanding about their role. Any goals or performance reviews or targets that they've been set should be clear to you, and you should have all that information in advance. A really good way of conducting an appraisal and giving feedback is to obtain feedback from other people as well. So people around them, people that they work with, maybe up and down the line, people that they're around them in their team, trying to get some feedback from them so you can give a more of a what's known as sort of 360 appraisal with them. It's not essential and it may not be appropriate in the individual circumstances, but getting good quality feedback that matches their goals, their job description, the targets, that kind of thing. In your preparation, it's just as important to prepare the person who's having the appraisal as to what's going to happen with the process. Particularly if it's the first time you're doing it, if it's a new process that's being introduced or the employee is new to the organisation, has never had an appraisal before. People could be really worried about it. Going back to what I was saying earlier about the whole school report type scenario, people expect appraisals to be being told off, if you like, being given all the negatives, and they often have that perception. So it's really important to set it up correctly in order to get the best out of it. So talk to them and explain what the process is, what they are to expect from the process, the fact that it is a conversation. It's an opportunity for them to feed back just as much as it is for you. And it's an opportunity for them to explore what motivates them, what they might want in terms of growth and development, all of those sorts of things. And so really let them know that there is nothing to worry about, and sort of prep them if there are going to be any difficult conversations or anything that you anticipate that might be particularly contentious, so that they have that in mind before, but obviously in an appropriate and kind way, so that they're not worrying about it in advance. Then when it comes to the actual appraisal meeting, if you have forms for the appraisal, recording and process and questions that you would normally ask, again, it's really important to make sure that those questions and those forms are a guide only, that you go into it as a conversation, that you start off by asking open questions, getting the individual's feedback, asking them how they feel that things have gone. What do they think about their own performance? How do they think they could improve? If the employee has that sort of self-awareness and brings it to you first, it makes it much easier to get to the answers, to get to the important parts of it, of how things are going to improve, or how you're going to do things better in the future, or how you can continue to capitalise on the things that are going well. If you are going to give any sort of criticism or feedback that might be deemed to be sort of negative, it's important to do that in a constructive way. So think about, again, what you want to achieve by having that conversation. What do you want to get out of it? And making sure that you're doing it in a constructive way. Avoid sort of generalizations and make sure that you have sort of tangible things to discuss if there are particular areas of their performance that aren't necessarily up to the standard that you might expect. And of course, keep in mind praising those good things, and it's equally important to have tangible things to talk about in relation to praise and positive feedback. It's no good just saying, oh, well done, you've done really well. It's important to be specific about the things that they have done well, so that they know what they can improve on in future, or how they can look at those good things and what's gone well and replicate those elsewhere. The final part of the appraisal meeting and the appraisal process that is critical is planning for the future. You want to have the appraisal process to be reflective of what's happened, but also to look at what's going to happen in the future. How are we going to work going forward? What kinds of things are we going to be doing? How are we going to identify your goals and objectives? And how are we going to review those? What kind of training and development might you need? And how are things going to look in terms of actions going forward? And then after the appraisal, obviously following up on those, making sure that if you've made promises in terms of development and training, that those are followed up. Or if you can't make those promises, you say that you will follow up and look into it for them and then do so. If there are particular areas that have been causing concern, that you are setting clear timescales for improvement in relation to those, and that you are following up on the positives. There is nothing worse than going through an appraisal process, which can be time consuming for management for sure. So you go through the process of preparation, planning, having the meeting, filling out the forms, doing all of those sorts of things, having great conversations, and then filing the appraisal form in a drawer, never to be seen again, or never to be seen until the next year when you dig it out in advance of the next appraisal meeting. Employees will very quickly lose faith in the process if you are not invested in it and you are not following up. So it may be that if you don't have the time and resources to do that follow-up piece, that you decide, actually, we're better off not doing appraisals or annual reviews altogether until we're able to meaningfully invest in that in the time that comes after it as well. Now, I'm very much of the view that every employee should have a regular review, not just an annual appraisal. The annual appraisal should then form part of ongoing discussions with individuals. Now, ideally, that should be monthly, but I recognise in many organisations and businesses, and certainly in certain teams, that's not going to be practical because of the time that's involved. But at least touching base with individuals on a one-to-one basis every 3 months or every quarter is very important if you're going to get the best out of those people and your appraisal processes. So to recap, the important things to think about in the appraisal process are: what do you want to achieve from that process? Do we have the resources and the time to put into it that we really need to make it a meaningful and beneficial process for everybody? Then, if you are going to go ahead with the process, ensure that you undertake the necessary planning and preparation, that you prepare yourself as the person doing the appraisal, and you also prepare the person being appraised so that they understand what's going to happen. You use the meeting as a conversation, an opportunity to talk through where the individual, again, in my view, should be having the majority of the airtime, and you should be doing most of the listening. And then it's really important to set out what's going to happen next and to follow up on that. So hopefully you have found this useful. Again, as I said, it is very much my own views on the appraisal process, and I'm sure that many of you may have very good things that you're doing, or you might have some suggestions or comments. So if you do, please get in touch, or you can leave them in the comments wherever you're listening or viewing this podcast. I would love to hear from you, and I'd be happy to share those with others, because obviously the knowledge shared of best practice will really help us all to improve the world of work for everyone. Now, if you want any help in relation to setting up an appraisal process, sorting out your forms, or to train your staff in relation to how to do appraisals well, then I would be very happy to help you. Myself and my team would be able to help you with this. So don't hesitate to get in touch. My email is alison@realemploymentoradvice.co.uk, or you can contact us on the head office number, which is 01983 897 003. As always, it's been fantastic bringing you this podcast again on a fortnightly basis. I'm always looking for topics or suggestions or questions to cover in the podcast. So if you have any, please do get in touch. And of course, if you want to connect with me on LinkedIn, you can send me a message or leave a comment on there, and I'll be happy to cover it in the next podcast. Many thanks for listening, and I hope you have a fantastic 2 weeks ahead. And I'll be back in a fortnight with the next episode.
Thanks again for listening. Just want to finalise by saying I wouldn't be a lawyer unless I had a legal disclaimer. So I must just say to you that the information in this podcast is for information only. It's general review and a general update. It's always necessary to get specific legal advice about your circumstances. So please don't rely on anything that you've heard in this podcast. But please do feel free to contact me if you'd like further information or specific advice.